Sometimes I think my stories, people are like, wow, this woman has a story for everything.
That's
But
why
this,
we put you on the radio.
right?
That's
Oh my
right.
goodness. But so this happened to me actually in 2004. So it's been 20 years. But I was invited by the Army chaplaincy to go to Landstuhl, Germany, and during the Operation Iraqi Freedom, that was just so intense in that, well, intense then, but continuing. But I was invited to go, and it was an odd, it's to me, it seemed like a very odd invitation. I was actually going to Germany because of preparing for World Youth Day that was going to be happening in 2005. So I was on the pre-setup for that World Youth Day the year prior. And when my calendar popped up that I was going to be there, they contacted me through the Army chaplaincy and said, would you come to Landstuhl, Germany and visit the wounded that are there? Now, I had been to Landstuhl years prior when my husband and I lived in Germany when he was active duty Army. And so I was familiar with the hospital, but for whatever reason, I didn't remember it being as big as it is. And so they had asked me, and this seemed just strange, right? What they asked me to bring photographs, like, to sign, and so that I could sign photos and give them to people. And I'm thinking to myself, well, that sounds kind of fun. So I had all of these, the little 8x10 glossies made up and my little Sharpie, and I arrive. And after the first visit, I actually did. I chucked all the pictures because it was ridiculous. Here are these men and women wounded on the battlefield, and not one or two, but it's a 3,000 bed hospital. It's a massive hospital. And the chaplain, so there was a Protestant chaplain and his assistant that were taking me from room to room to meet the men and women who had been wounded, and to hear their stories and to hear what they experienced on the battlefield was heart-wrenching. And the reason that I threw out the photographs was because I thought, what a stupid thing to give a picture of myself when they are giving of themselves literally to defend us, to defend our country, to be in war, to be on the battlefield. And they call it downrange. So what that means when you are downrange is that you are being shot at. The range, when you consider what a firing range is, when you are downrange, you're on the area of the range where the bullets are coming at you. And so the battlefield is considered downrange because you are the incoming battle, the incoming ammo. And I'll show, for those of you who are watching, I'm going to show you, this was a gift that I was given while I was there. So instead of me giving my pictures, it's kind of hard to see this, but this hat was signed by so many of the service members who were in that hospital, who were recovering from the injuries that they had received. And I'll never forget this one man in particular. He had been there for a while. And as I was talking to him, he said, have you heard the scripture passage that after Christ died and rose and Thomas was not there, and then Thomas came? And I was like, yeah, I'm very familiar with that passage. And he said, well, when Christ said, put your hand into my side, he lifted the side of his hospital gown and he said, you could put your hand in my side. And there was a wound in his side that was, the internal part of it had partially already healed over, where the internal skin was healed, but there was this like a deep healing wound in his side that I literally could have put my hand in probably 2 or 3 inches into that wound in his side. And then he told me how he got the wound. And, we talk about love of enemies. We talk about how do we live in that in the moment of a war. And what was crazy, the way that he received that wound was the children were used as pawns, basically, in the area that they were at in Iraq. And there was this one little boy in particular who had become friends with this service member. And he would give him juice boxes or little things that we would send to our service members overseas for their comfort. And the little kid would come in, and he became friends with this particular sergeant. And after a couple of weeks of becoming friends with the child, the enemy had literally strapped bombs onto this child. And the child was walking into the base. I mean, he was walking into where the munitions were, where the service members were. He was a walking bomb, not even knowing. I mean, this child did not know what was happening to him. And as he walked in, the service member, the sergeant, he had no choice but to stop the child. And the only way that he could do that was with deadly force. And he watched that child literally disintegrate in front of his eyes. We sit at home. We sit here in the comfort of our homes being protected when our servicemen and women are literally defending us with their lives. And the fact that this man paused, because you cannot, when you have a heart, when you have become friends with the enemy, right? This child was literally his enemy. Didn't know it. But as he raised his arm to fire, he paused because he couldn't just lift and shoot like you would normally be trained to do. And as he paused, that's when the sniper from the other side took him in the side, because that's the area of the body that was not protected well because of the gear. And the enemy knew that. And so as he paused, this was vulnerable. And so he took the shot in the side. The fact that he lived was miraculous. That was one of, I can't tell you how many stories in the 2 days that I spent there. And then I spent time with the family members. It's called Fisher House. And Fisher House is a place where family members can come and stay when they are visiting their loved ones who have been brought into the hospital until they have either recuperated enough to go back to work, God help them, or when they have been then permanently released from active duty because of medical. And to have had that type of experience, it changed me. It changed the way that I look at an enemy. It changed the way that I look at the way that our men and women who serve give of themselves. And it was transformative. It was absolutely transformative. And, to go from that experience of 2 days, and the other part of that, and this is very, very powerful in a Catholic witness, was that going again from room to room, there were a number of the soldiers who said, I need the chaplain. And here's a chaplain walking with me. And he's like, no, I need the chaplain. And I was like, you need a priest? And he's like, I need a priest. And so beginning that afternoon, there was a retired civilian priest who was living there in Landstuhl, and I was able to connect with him. And then he went with me on the rounds. And one by one, the men who wanted the sacrament of reconciliation were able to receive that. So their healing was as much spiritual and emotional as it was physical. I will never forget that. I will never forget that experience of being in, then able to say, Father, come in with me, and to go from room to room who those men and women who wanted that incredible sacrament of healing. Because even though they know they're doing what they have to do, you cannot help as a human being to know that you've taken a life in battle in a righteous way. I mean, if you ever question war, if you ever question the validity of war, read the Book of Kings. I mean, read the Book of Kings. It's when God would give the battle to those, he would literally strengthen those. He would hold up those who were doing the righteous aspect of the war. And so anyhow, that's that
is a beautiful story.
Yeah. Wow.
Beautiful story. I mean, it really illustrates what Adam and Debbie were talking about, love being sacrifice.
Yep.
And if love is the only thing that remains, that lasts into eternity, sacrifice is that only thing that remains. And you really see it there with the soldiers because of the sacrifices that they make.
That's true.
Yeah. Having been an Army wife, and I was not, my husband was not career as far as 20 years, but the time that we spent together as a military family, and since then, I mean, I'm married to a veteran. It's a day that we shouldn't just take for granted here in this country. Like so many things, there are, it makes me a little cray cray when I see people who are taking a holiday, like Veterans Day, and let's have a furniture sale, let's go down and, I'm like, what does that have to do with our military? We're going to give you 10% off. Wow, that's great. How about supplying for families who are in need because their husband or wife is literally downrange, or our son who was Air Force, we watched him serve for so many years. And it's amazing to me where, the person who's demanding their right to be crazy in our world has not a clue of what our veterans have done with their lives to serve. And again, we look at that in a Christian perspective, in a Catholic perspective. Christ gave us the perfect example of laying down his life for us.
Everything. He gave everything. Yeah.
Yeah, it reminds me of how even Debbie and Adam mentioned like how watered down the word love is. Same kind of goes with the Veterans Day. Like nothing. It's like we can celebrate Veterans Day by buying a mattress. Like that's really. Has it really come to this? Like instead of celebrating the actual veterans, we're going to celebrate by buying a mattress.
That's why it's so important to share these stories. Just like you walk into that situation, Julie, and you had these pictures that you were like, oh, this will be a nice gesture, and then you realize the insignificance and inadequacy of that. We need to share those stories. That's why we need to talk to people like Father Peter Pomposello. We need to talk to Julie. We need to actually, engage with veterans that are out there, and let that kind of enter into the sacrifice and sufferings of others, both the ones who are the victims of the war and the ones who have to perpetrate it and the ones who are sacrificing to protect us. We need to keep sharing those stories. And that's what we do here is share stories. I mean, Keith, you've seen that, right?
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah. Time after time.
The more you share those stories, it truly does. I mean, a very dear friend of ours, Father Jerry Fain, he met my husband when Kurt was still in the National Guard, coming out of the active duty. He was serving up in Belmont, Arizona. He met Father Jerry Fain, and Father Jerry, through Kurt's witness of what he had experienced in the Army, Father decided to join the Army. And so his diocese allowed him to become an Army chaplain. And Father Jerry, I don't remember how many times he was deployed downrange, and the number of men that he would literally baptize as they were dying on the battlefield. I mean, Father, who we just heard this morning, I mean, if he was giving you the stories that we actually need to hear, it'd be so meaningful to have him back in just to give those stories, those realities. That we use the word story sometimes, and it's almost like it was a made up thing, but it's not. Right. These were the actual things that this person has experienced. And when Father Jerry would come home after having been downrange, he would come to our home as kind of a respite. We'd get a phone call, hey, I'm coming in tomorrow. I mean, it would be very short notice. And at that time we had another Rottweiler, her name was Bailey, and Father was a dog person, and Bailey and Father would sit out by the pool. He would walk out and Bailey would just kind of sit next to him like his own little service dog for, emotional support. And he would just sit and kind of decompress. He would take time. He wouldn't say anything. Like we wouldn't talk for hours. He would come, he would just spend time in quiet. He'd use the guest room or whatever. We would just have this time of quiet. And then when he was able to talk, we didn't hear the details of what he went through, but he was able to talk about the healing that was happening in his life. And when I was working on the book, Savior and Sustenance, a few years ago, and I was talking and interviewing different priests of what they experience in praying the Eucharistic prayer, Father Jerry was the priest that I interviewed. And I asked him how he felt when he knew that Catholics who were here safely in the United States, where we don't have war on our grounds, how does it make him feel when Catholics are too lazy to go to church on Sunday? And he said it made him angry. He said, here they are in the comfort and the complete peace to be able to go to Mass and experience the beauty of the Eucharistic embrace. And they've got 20 different excuses of what they're going to do on Sunday, where the guys that he was serving, if they were found going to Mass, where he was offering Mass out there, in various places, they would be killed for going to Mass. He would be killed for offering the sacrifice of the Mass. I mean, literally, he was putting his life on the line to offer the sacrifice of the Mass. So on maybe this year on Veterans Day, wherever you're listening, think about that. Think about the sacrifice that Christ offered us to give himself for us. And if we have something better than that to do, rethink it. Rethink it.